The hosts feel it would be a little unkind to present this podcast without just a word of friendly warning. We are about to unfold the story of Frankenstein, a man of science who sought to create a man after his own image without reckoning upon God. It is one of the strangest tales ever told. It deals with the two great mysteries of creation, life and death. I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now's your chance to. Well, we've warned you.
Hello, and welcome once again to the Frankencast. I'm the mad scientist, Anthony Bowman. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm joined as always by...
the voice of your friend that always makes very questionable decisions. That is Eric Velasquez. My pronouns are also he, him. I feel like that sums everything we just watched/listened to up.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Well, this week we're doing Terror of Frankenstein, but something different.
Yeah, so we mentioned last time, so we're doing this sort of like experimental thing called Director's Commentary, Terror of Frankenstein, that sort of superimposes like a fictional commentary track on top of Terror of Frankenstein, the movie we watched last week.
Yeah, and I'm here for it.
Yeah, it's weird, but it's pretty cool. Like, I've never really seen anything else like this.
Yeah, I like the fact that they basically add their own story, the behind-the-scenes story. It's so interesting.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess I mentioned this last time, but if you're listening in and you, for some reason, didn't catch last episode, this movie is pretty hard to track down, but if it sounds like something that you would be into, we've talked to the director. I think we're going to actually be talking to the director and maybe do an episode with that. But he did say if you wanted to pick up a copy, you could email him and he'd arrange something. His email address is tim2kirk@yahoo.com. So that's Tim, the number 2, and then KIRK at Yahoo.
Amazing. Do we get royalties from that? No, I'm kidding. Shill mode activated.
I think they did a Kickstarter, and probably he just has some spares lying around from that. Like, I don't think you can really find this otherwise, but it's definitely worth checking out. It's a really interesting watch for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So okay, so actually when you start, it doesn't actually start with the movie. You kind of are like watching a person go through the menu screen on a DVD. It kind of like, it sort of railroads you to where it wants you to go.
And my dumb ass was like, hey, wait a second. This isn't a DVD. It shouldn't be doing things on its own.
Yeah, so like at first it like sends you to like a slideshow thing, and you see a couple slides that look like they're from like a screening of the film. You have like somebody dressed up in like a wedding dress holding flowers. You've got somebody holding a big like kind of duffel bag suitcase, which we'll learn more about what that's about. And then we just see like a theater full of people all kind of like, watching a screen. And then we get like the person controlling the remote goes to the commentary track, selects it, and then presses play, and then we're actually into the movie as we saw last week.
Yeah, and so we immediately get the individual kind of introducing themselves in a very muffled way. We're going to know them as Gavin Merrill, who is played by fucking Bert from Return of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
So, if you know, you know. If you don't, go watch that movie as well. That's your homework.
Yeah. So it's, Clu Gulager as Gavin. Mm-hmm. So we find out he's the director, and we'll see that, obviously the actual credits won't indicate that Gavin Merrill was the director, but they explain that away that, like, Gavin and...
David Falks.
Yeah. They were, like, a partnership. One wrote, one directed, but they, like, started out in the theater, and they sort of, like, used pen names when they, like, got into the movie business.
Yeah, Calvin and Yvonne.
Yeah. So, yeah, we've got the two of them. They're doing the commentary track, the writer and director discussing. And as they go, they kind of keep hinting that Leon Vitali, the actor who plays Victor Frankenstein, is going to be showing up later on. And we'll get to him later.
Yeah, surprise, he does show up.
Yeah, they got the actual actor to show up, especially considering where this goes. It's wild that they got somebody involved in the story.
Yeah, so it turns out that this is the 37th anniversary edition of the Cut of Terror of Frankenstein. Why 37 and not just going for 40? You know?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
You got 3 years.
Yeah.
But plus these guys were writers for the fictional Theater 41, which gets some pretty good nicknames later on.
Yeah, so like it almost sounds very like Stuart Gordon-ish, where it's like they started with this like sort of theater troupe and then eventually kind of moved their way into theatrical work. And it starts out pretty like a normal commentary. They're watching the credits, they're joking about like the font choice. David says that he actually has not seen the film since the premiere, other than the clips he saw at the trial. So
we know
we're already
something.
getting hints that something weird happened.
Yeah, we got some bad shit that's happened somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Well, not only that, but they mentioned that this was a direct adaptation of their play, Frankenstein über alles, from 1974. So,
which is such a good name.
It kind of is, yeah. Once again, Frankenstein versus Nazis. That's all I'm saying.
Oh yeah. And they talk about that getting Leon Vitali to sign on was a big deal. He had just been in Barry Lyndon, the Stanley Kubrick movie, so that's actually true, and is also like, yeah, it must have actually been a big deal to get him at this time,
right,
for a low budget monster movie. Yeah, so they talk, they're talking about that like theater was their passion, and going to do this film was kind of a big departure. But like you said, they had this theatrical version, or this in the theater, and decided to expand it to a film version.
Yeah, so as you said, they pretty much were trying to bring on multiple people. They got a hold of a gentleman by the name of Nicholas Clay, who plays Henry Clerval, and that guy was kind of their linchpin. He brought in, what is it, Isabella...
Yeah, did they ever say her last name?
No, but I'm looking up the actual actress.
Because I think in the actual film, her name's not, or the actress is not Isabella. I think that was one of the things they changed for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Because they're talking about the woman who plays Elizabeth.
Yeah, in real life it's Stacey Dorning, but Nicholas Clay is Nicholas Clay.
Yeah, I wonder if they like asked around and got permission where they could, and then kind of fudged details where they couldn't.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, especially because Nicholas Clay, as we'll find out, like his role in this fictional story is pretty wild. Like, it's crazy that they were able to get this person's name on the film.
Right. Well, they also have Per Oscarsson, and that's another trip in and of itself.
Yeah.
But luckily they changed Jan Olsen's name and character backstory effectively.
Yeah, right. So Nicholas Clay, in their the theater version of the film, he played Victor, but they, to try to get like Hollywood buzz, they needed a bigger name. So they moved Nicholas over to playing Henry Clerval, and got Leon Vitali to replace Nicholas as Victor.
Well, really, it was that Vitali was like, no, I'm playing Victor.
Yeah, I think they just like, whatever we can get you for, if that's what you're taking, then we'll arrange things. We'll make it work. Right.
Because originally I think they wanted him to be Clerval, but, having a big name and name recognition allows you to throw your weight around.
Yeah. And so, like, we get some bits of, like, them just talking about the actual, what we're seeing on screen, and then we also just get, like, as they kind of discuss things, we're obviously getting, like, bits of this mystery slowly kind of filled in as we go. There's a part where Gavin says something about his fans, and David's like, your fans? He says, you're a carny selling tragedy to stoned freaks.
Yep. And I would be happy to be one of those stoned freaks. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And he also kind of says something about that, like, this was really Gavin's last theatrical film. Like, he kind of got stuck, like, directing TV episodes after this.
Specifically T.J. Hooker, which hilariously I think is something that Clu Gallagher did, or at least was was in episodes of T.J. Hooker.
Yeah, I'd believe it. He's one of those dudes that was just in like all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, he's one of those guy actors.
Mm-hmm. Gavin does mention that, like, I guess this might explain the 37th anniversary thing. He says something about that the DVD's being rushed out due to sudden new interest after recent events.
Yeah.
And
what do you think those are? That's weird, right?
yeah, and David like mentions that the recent events are an execution.
Right. So we know somebody's going to get murdered. Obviously, they're going to be executed for a reason.
So we know the end results of the trial that they mentioned earlier. Now we just have to figure out how we got there.
Yeah, but you notice they didn't play any clips of Isabella during the trial. They specifically call that out.
And yeah, I think then around that point is where we get to the flashback of Geneva, of young Victor, from the boat, and we see Elizabeth. And yeah, that's where like I think both of them kind of are just like it kind of takes their breath away to see her. Like they have not seen her in a long time. Especially David is just like I don't know that I can do this. Like I'm not prepared to see all these people again, especially Isabella.
Yeah, it's kind of like they all had a crush on Isabella, or maybe she was the warmest person in the room. Kind of like Elizabeth.
Yeah, like they kind of they're talking about how she was just like this wonderful, warm woman. She was so young. She was just so full of life, like Elizabeth. As this goes, like it starts with like David being very antagonistic towards Gavin. That he's just like. He's kind of treating Gavin like he's like a vulture for trying to get any sort of money or any sort of like eyes on this film anymore. But he's also here recording this commentary track, so he's not blameless. But he does kind of imply that like the reason he's there is because he wants to get the true story across, and that he's not concerned with like appearances. He's gonna tell it how it was.
Right. Tell his side of the story.
Yeah, exactly.
And not just for lunch boxes and T-shirts and. Apparently Rocky Horror style screenings of
exactly.
past tragedy.
Yeah. Gavin starts talking about, Leon being a great actor and that his chemistry with Isabella was really great. And David gets like, he's like, fuck Leon.
Right. And his mainstream appeal. We were part of a movement, damn it.
Yeah.
I love it. David is the true artiste. Like, he's not there for the money. He's there for the art. And I love it.
Yeah. And, he's like, and, Isabella joining us was the worst decision that she ever made.
Right. The worst thing is, or not the worst thing, but they found her at a performance of something called Surgical Nixon that was done in Cleveland, Ohio. And I'm like, that's a perfectly tragic backstory just to be in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm kidding, Cleveland, if you
Yeah, and so Gavin talks about that like Leon was really popular with all the girls in the village.
So popular that he actually took Isabella away from Nicholas.
Yeah. While they were in the theater, Isabella and Nicholas kind of had a thing, but yeah, she kind of like abandoned Nicholas for Leon when they started the filming. And then that's when we see the first scene with Victor and Henry together. And so, we've just found out that clearly they had some off-screen tension. So, that scene, it kind of lends a little bit more tension to them on screen there. And Gavin even says, like, this scene's really popular when people come watch the film now because they know all the backstory.
Right, which, okay, interesting. All right, I'm here for the setup.
Yeah, and David is kind of disgusted by this, like that. Oh, of course they're into that. Like these freaks that are watching this movie now, like that this would be a scene they're particularly interested in.
Right, and automatically they become instant cinephiles, as he puts it.
Yeah, and but Gavin, he's like, yeah, it doesn't really matter what gets people into the theater. They do see the film, and they may have had ambulance chaser sort of vibes going in, but like they're actually seeing the film, and that some of them do learn to appreciate it for what it really is, and not for the gruesome backstory.
Right, and you know what? I can appreciate that because being a young person at one time, I was like, yeah, let's see the messed up stuff. Let's go.
Yeah,
and that brought me to the realms of actual art.
Yeah, I mean, I think, people come to things from different ways, and, I think like Gavin's just like, I'm happy to have a wider audience, and, hopefully it spreads, and why ever they're here, it's good that we've got eyes on the film.
So at this point, though, I believe that either Gavin calls David or David calls Gavin the original goon himself. What is this in reference to?
Yeah, as it goes, the word goon comes up a few more times, and, like, I think it is about like what happens to people during the method.
Oh,
we'll get
okay.
More into the method, but I think that they refer. Yeah, I think that's where that's coming from.
So he was the original one who actually participated in the method, versus. Well, yeah, I mean, we do know that David basically is the mastermind behind the method, whatever that will be, which we'll find out later what that is.
Yeah. So, like, you know, at this point, I think David says stuff about, like, you know, that he feels like the audiences are mocking their dead friends, that they don't actually care.
Well, he even blames Vitaly for ruining his life after that little stunt in the airport, where he says some things. They don't say it yet, but we find out what it is later on, and it's pretty harsh. I mean, not you know.
Yeah, this movie does, or this track, this commentary, does a really good job of, like, giving you little nuggets of the story slowly so that you don't feel like your time's being wasted, but the whole time you're just like, what does that mean? And then you just kind of move forward a little bit, and you're like, oh, okay, I understand that now, but what about that? And yeah, it just, like, they feed it to you really slowly.
Yeah, this audio play definitely likes to set things up, and does it pay them off? Like, honestly, for a while there, I was like, okay, this is literally just two guys just bullshitting about, like, some vague event that happened, but it's like, oh no, this was all intentional. Okay.
And I think actually when David is complaining about Vitaly, I think that is the first time we hear them talk about the method.
Right, he wants the method to be understood.
Yeah, because Vitaly told the press about the method after the trial at the airport, even though he was supposed to be legally prohibited from doing so.
Right, it was inadmissible evidence he drops, and it's like, oh, this is related to that case again. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And David's like, you know, I don't think the method had anything to do with what happened. I'm only even mentioning it so that we can clear things up.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But then that's when we first get the introduction of Barry, who's, I guess, the, not necessarily stage manager, but the...
he's like a sound engineer kind of, I
exactly.
think.
Yeah, and he's like, all right, you got to hurry up. We got a certain amount of time. We haven't been able to get a hold of Vitaly.
Yeah, he's like, we've got to... they rented out the recording studio for 2 hours, and we've got an hour and a half movie, so we can't play around. Like, we just got to keep going. David's like, wait, Vitaly, like, he's gonna be here? And Gavin's like, yeah, it was on the call sheet, the email that went out. Like, you should have known he was gonna be there.
Yeah, Chloe should have told you, right?
Yeah, and David he's not thrilled about that, but he's kind of like, you kind of get the sense that he's like, all right, fine, like, if I'm gonna have to deal with him, like, I'm gonna confront him and finally set the record straight directly with Vitaly there.
Yeah, and Gavin's kind of like, yeah, tell him your feelings. Absolutely.
Yeah. Then we see, like, there's the scene with, like, the seance, and it's one of the few scenes that, like, they let it play for about, like, 30 seconds or so with, like, no commentary. And then we see as Victor goes to leave for school, and you got his, like, pile of luggage as he's headed out, and Gavin's like, oh, man, that asshole from forensics, he made us, like, analyze this shot for
6 hours straight.
6 hours straight. Yeah.
Damn.
So, you know, as we said earlier in those little, like, photos in the slideshow, there was a suitcase there. Now we got suitcases that required hours of analysis. So
right, yeah. So what's up with that, I wonder?
Yeah.
Well, also, as we see Victor actually walk out, Gavin mentions that this was a very hard morning because it turns out the night before they were kind of partying in, I guess, either a place in Switzerland or France. It sounded very French to me. Le Bourge de Fort and at La Lune, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's what he's... Yeah. So they were... Yeah, they're all kind of hungover during this
right.
scene.
Yeah, it's a good, easy first day of shooting, right?
Yeah.
Well, then we get the introduction to a Julius Danville, who's supposed to be playing Waldheim. Who is the actual actor for Waldheim? Okay, that's Archie O'Sullivan is the actual person.
Right, yeah. And so we find out that this character, Danville, was, like, independently wealthy. He just kind of acted for fun, basically.
Well, not only that, but he did taxidermy for fun.
Yeah.
Which, wow, that comes back in a wild way, huh?
All right, yeah. And apparently, so he had, like, a lot of connections, a lot of, like, upper crust society people and rich people, and the theater troupe really liked sort of, like, shocking his friends. Like, they would put together events where, like, they could do sort of, like, edgy theater and like, you know, shake things up with his friends.
Well, apparently Danville and his friends styled themselves as the deviant elite. So they were there to be shocked.
But they say something about that, like, they put on a play... at Leonard Bernstein's apartment, and Henry Kissinger
passed
was there
out
and almost vomited.
Yeah, I could see that, but
yeah, it's just two very strange names to drop in here, but yeah, I gotta love it.
Yeah, well, David actually even calls themselves, we were the Little Totem Revolutionaries, which that's a very auteur thing to say about yourself, but all right.
And they say something about that, like, Danville had a really interesting way of performing, that he was very kind to the other actors and almost like a father figure, but that he held the audience in contempt. Like, he did not view the people watching them very highly at all.
Yeah, he was definitely like a father. He was like a very heavy drinking gay father.
Right. And then they mentioned that, like, the night before this particular scene was shot, the cast was also, I think in this case, they were all high on a boat on Lake Geneva,
right,
is what they say. So they're clearly partying it up, like, every night.
And they even, maybe they're doing a little bit of fishing, because they pull out a sturgeon out of the water. And what does Danville do with the sturgeon?
So he takes out a knife, he cuts it up, and he turns it into a mask.
Right, which is Isabella promptly dons.
Such a strange detail, and it comes up several more times as we go. But like, I had such a hard time imagining like what a mask would look like made out of did they use the head, or is this just like they just opened up the stomach and used like the flat part and just cut out eye holes? I have no idea.
I want to believe that they used like the face plate thing of the fish, almost. Like a domino mask.
No matter how it looks, like, this has got to be a horrifying mask.
Oh, yeah. It cannot smell good either.
No. And then, they say, like, Isabella even wore it on set a couple of times. Mm-hmm. And then we get, like, an early implication of maybe where things are going, where they kind of imply that Danville, he lived a very dangerous gay lifestyle.
Right, especially with all of his boy prostitutes. So I don't know if we provided the content warning before, but now we are doing so.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to dark places.
Oh, absolutely. And then, in fact, like, in the next scene, we see Victor. He is carrying that, like, kind of large medical bag again. Mm-hmm. And Gavin's like, oh, look, he's got the bag. And David's like, I see it. You don't have to point it out. Like, I don't want to think about that bag.
Yeah, fuck that bag.
Then we get, like, our first sort of, like, real indication of what's going on, because they say, Danville was very wealthy. He rented a room in Geneva for a whole year for while they were shooting. He was just going to, like, hang out there. And that might be why he wasn't found until months after he died.
Right. Oh, well, something happened there. But luckily, for whoever, it was dismissed as a crime of passion.
Yeah.
Presumably, somehow, Danville may have done this to himself? Or a lover?
Yeah, because at first he was tied up in a way that suggested it was like some kind of sex game. But then they're like, but he cut Danville's head off. That's a very different kind of crime of passion.
Right, but also we get a little bit of David being like, I don't remember that exactly.
Yeah. But like you said, apparently people were theorizing, even with him having his head gone, that he might have done it to himself. And they're like, I don't know, how you could be possibly be so high that you could cut off your own head while on drugs.
Right, yeah. I mean, that's pretty amazing. Not unless you're right beside a giant industrial fan.
Yeah. Yeah, true.
Right? But hey, apparently Danville was pretty good with his hands, they note. I mean, what does that mean, you think?
Yeah, I have no idea.
Okay. maybe they were good friends with Danville. Real good friends.
Yeah, could be.
Yeah.
And so then we have, like, the scene that is sort of like the montage of Victor, experimenting and doing autopsies and all that. And they talk about that, like, this is where they started to use the method to get better performances from Vitali. So they would use, like, odd call times so that he'd be, like, tired. They would use, like, really cold sets. And they'd hide rotten meat everywhere, so everything was just, like, smelly and just, like, just to get him sort of, like, in a weird headspace.
Right. Well, not only that, apparently the thing with the cow, where we theorized that maybe they did hit the cow, apparently that's exactly what they did.
They made him watch them slaughter cows and, like, didn't tell him that that's what was going to happen.
Right, but they're actually specifically proud that he didn't flinch when that happened. They're like, good job, he didn't flinch. That's some acting. Which I don't know if that's acting or shock.
Right, yeah. It seems like the method is sort of a cross between acting and shock.
Right, yep. That sounds right.
And then, of course, the scene after the slaughterhouse is the monkey scene that we talked about last time, where Victor straps a monkey to a tiny chair and then kills it.
Yeah, apparently he did this out of spite, though.
Yeah, like in this they're saying that like Vitali literally actually killed the monkey just to spite the director and writer because he's so mad at what they were doing to him in terms of the method.
Right. And of course they also mentioned the mistake they made by bringing in Nichols. So interesting.
Yeah, and because they brought in Nicholas to work with Vitali, and they're like that. Yeah, because of the tension between them, it didn't work. He was much better when we used him in the Immersion set
the Immersion.
with Per Oscarson.
Huh. That's weird. Okay.
Yeah, so we're getting all of these like sort of buzzwords that you're just like, you know, what is the method? What the fuck is the Immersion set? Like they just sound unpleasant and scary, and obviously intentionally so.
Right.
But they were like, well, we had to use Nicholas, though, even though there was a tension there, because, I mean, we couldn't use Isabella because she was sleeping with Vitali, so there was much more of a relationship between them, so she wouldn't have worked.
Right, yeah. She would have put him either more at ease, or I'm guessing she probably wouldn't have gone through with it a bit.
Yeah. And they wanted to get him to that next level of darkness, and that wouldn't have worked with her.
Right. Well, it doesn't seem like that quite worked with Vitali, but you know, we'll see what happens.
There's a bit here where they start to kind of like they're kind of passing blame to each other, Gavin and David, because you know Gavin was like, I didn't even know what you all were doing over on the Immersion set. It was so hard to keep up with the events on two different sets simultaneously.
Right. And David was like, well, you know, I didn't really know either. But of course, Gavin's like, well, you were the guy in charge on that set specifically. That's what you did.
Yeah, and he was like, I had heard that things had kind of deteriorated, but I didn't realize the extent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of seems like David's either disassociating or maybe whatever happened caused him to forget bits and pieces.
Yeah. And then on screen, we get the scene where, like, Victor asks for a bigger ice box. Mm-hmm. And they're kind of like, I forgot that guy's name. What was his name? It's so weird that he got murdered, too, because he wasn't even really part of the troupe. Like, it's strange that the murderer sought him out as well.
Yeah, it's like the murderer just took care of everybody who was even a bit member of this thing.
Yeah.
That's weird. All right.
So then we're kind of getting into like the creation part of the story.
Specifically the creation in the book, too, about collecting.
Yeah, and like, Gavin sort of like gets into like, he's clearly like, he knows about the book. Like, it's not just, a director filming a script. And he's like, technically there's not really grave robbing in the novel. They just say something about collecting materials. But, that was really a part of the story right from the beginning in terms of like, this being put on film. Like, right from the Universal films, it's always been grave robbing.
Yeah, and continued ever since, right?
Yeah.
Well, then we get the scene where the body gets dropped off for delivery, and and Victor / Vitali is hoisting it up, and they actually mention a point where, wow, this is really dark. I can barely see what's going on. So that's some meta comedy there.
Yeah. Yeah. They are, actually doing it. And he's like, is there going to be like a remaster? Or are we just seeing like an early cut? And he was like, no, this is the movie. That's all we're getting.
Yep. We lost the prince. This is it.
Yeah. And, they go into like that the creation scene is always the centerpiece of Frankenstein films. And that, it's hard to do anything different, but, electricity is always sort of like the centerpiece.
Right.
Even though, again, that's not really part of the novel.
Right. Well, I mean, in the novel, it's just yada, 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 boom, the thing's alive now.
Yeah.
But at this point, Gavin says one of the best lines of the whole director's commentary. You go where the money is, David. Hell yeah, you do.
Right. And so while they're doing like the reviving scene, they talk about like, They get into their stage play a little bit more, and apparently the creature in these scenes, there wasn't a person under the sheet. Mm-hmm. It was like a bunch of meat. Like ground up meat that they shaped into a person.
Right, and this was more authentic to their original vision in their stage play.
Yeah,
which that's wild. Okay.
Yeah, and they say something about this, so like that they kind of are implying more about the method, that like the way it works is they push the actors like to the edge of madness, and then because they do that, then that also sort of pushes the audience to the edge of madness when you're watching true insanity on screen.
Right, I believe they describe it as intentionally trained to lose control.
Yeah. And there's kind of like the implication that like the audience was really just a bunch of corpses.
Well, needy
they're
corpses.
Like galvanized meat puppets, just like their creature.
Right. Well, he says they're a crowd of needy corpses, which is an interesting way to look at people. And that's also very rude to look at your audience that way, I think. But who am I?
It goes back to that, like, having contempt for the audience that
Right.
Danville had. Like, they're clearly just trying to push things, and they're not really concerned about how it's going to affect people, whether it's people on, in their acting troupe or the people watching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty much it, the contempt for their fellow man. Mm-hmm. But we also get the mention of the Frankheads again. Apparently they could care less about any other movies other than, they don't care about the old 1930s Frankensteins. They only want to watch the terror of Frankenstein in this universe. Which, okay.
But Gavin kind of mentions that, like, even though the fans of this movie maybe aren't interested in other versions, that he's sort of fallen down a rabbit hole, that, like, he's obsessed. He's watching, like, every different variation of the Frankenstein story he can find. He's reading the novel over and over again. So he sounds like us.
Yeah, pretty
basically.
much. Yeah, right? Oh, shit, man. We're going to a dark place. Oh, no. But it's also this obsession that caused him to go back after Vitaly's statement, especially the one about them being called little Igors running around behind the scenes. Interesting. That's a pretty big slam.
And Gavin doesn't seem to understand it. He's like, this movie doesn't even have an Igor. There's not an Igor in the book. So I don't know what that's about. And David's kind of like, his response, like, he's kind of cagey about that. Like, it seems like he has a little bit more understanding of what the Igor thing means, but is kind of like keeping that to himself at the moment. Yeah,
then we get another funny bit where Per Oscarson's kind of starting to be revived, and I believe it's Gavin that just goes, "Here's Oscarson."
And they're really complimentary of Oscarson's acting. Like, they're just like, he's just really, like, bringing it to the screen. Like, his portrayal is just so brilliant. And Vitaly's a little too eager to please the audience here. He's kind of, it's a little too much, but Oscarson is just nailing this.
Right. And of course, this leads back to his time with Nicholas Clay on the Immersion Set.
Yeah, because at this point now, like, Henry is back on screen again, and they're talking about that, and they're just like, Nicholas had a really hard time working on the Immersion Set and playing Henry because he felt like his job had been stolen from him, the part of Victor.
Well, his job and his girlfriend, because even Isabel's like, fuck this guy. He's in my way.
Yeah, like, he's starting to get the sense that, like, Isabella doesn't even think he's good enough as an actor or, as a method person, like, whatever they're doing in the method. Like, Isabella felt like she was better than him at that.
Yeah. And maybe she was.
Yeah. At this point, Victor and Henry are leaving to go back to Geneva.
But we got that suitcase again.
Yeah, and they talk about that there are, like, a bunch of different websites that trace the suitcase's journey through the film, which would have been, I wish there was, like, ARG stuff where these, like, websites existed, because they would be fun to play around on.
Oh, hell yeah. But then we get the mention of we get to see Henry out in the snow where little William runs up to him. And in this case, little William is played by Mikhail.
Yeah, and there's some weird shit here that, like, they don't go into too much detail, but it's still pretty unpleasant. They say something like that William was Danville's protege, but that also they may have had some sort of inappropriate relationship.
Right.
They kind of even imply that, like, I think, does it David that says he saw them in a room together? And
yeah, David
was going on.
David walked in on Mikhail and Danville doing some funky stuff that apparently equates to Mikhail eventually being hooked on drugs and some bad stuff happening to him in his later life.
Yeah. And they mentioned that Mikhail was also killed by the serial killer,
right.
But it was like 6 years later, and it took a while to get tied to the string of killings because he also lived a dangerous life with, like, sex and drugs and everything. So his murder wasn't immediately connected to the rest of them.
Right, and then we actually get our first glimpse of Per Oscarsson truly as the monster. In this case, he's apparently been in deep immersion for 5 weeks.
Yeah.
So he's already undergoing the method 5 weeks in. And they're very proud of this.
Yeah, they are. And then we see, like, the creature killing William, and they're complimenting how great Oscarson looks in the role, like how believable it is. And then they're also kind of like, it's kind of a shame that he didn't actually kill the actor here, because it would have been better off than how he actually went out.
Right. And what's worse, you're having your head cut off or being burned alive. So we get that Mikhail was burned alive. That was his fate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully, Gavin does hope that him and David made Mikhail's life a little bit brighter, at least while they were on set.
And around this time, like, Gavin gets a call on his cell phone, and it's his assistant saying that Vitaly is lost, but that he's still on the way. So we're getting, we're pretty far into the film at this point, and Vitaly still hasn't arrived.
Mm-hmm. But of course, Gavin's also like, "Hey, before we hang up, I want to make sure we get enough printings of those T-shirts for the USC screening next week, okay?"
Right.
Just to reiterate he's in it for the money.
Yeah. Then we're at William's funeral, and Gavin and David are like, "Man, we've been to so many funerals since this film."
Right.
Like,
do you remember Henriksen's? And that's actually Captain Walton.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, the body count here, it feels like pretty much the whole cast is getting taken out by whatever's going on.
Right, yeah.
And then they continue talking about Oscarson and his performance. I think at this point where like the creature and Victor are in the ice cave, and they're just like, the method, he's just like acting circles around Vitaly. Like, Vitaly's nothing compared to what Oscarson is doing in these scenes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even David's like, "Gavin, this is your directing here is masterful." But by the way, that's literally when they cut from just Vitaly calling the monster, "You're a monster," to they're just chilling in the cave.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's a pretty good joke.
Yeah, it's like the most jarring edit of like anything, and yeah, that would be where he compliments his directing.
Yeah.
And so then we cut to the creature's flashback scenes, and they talk about that, like, so this is the Immersion Set. All of this was filmed with a skeleton crew and no human contact for Oscarson. So he's just like out in the woods by himself with hidden cameras, and the only time he had any interaction with any people, it was Nicholas and Isabella, and they were both wearing masks at the time.
Right, and Nicholas was wearing a boar mask, and Izzy was still wearing the sturgeon mask.
Yeah, and so they weren't even allowed to be referred to as Nick and Izzy. It was Boarface and Sturgeon.
Right, which that sounds like a freaking slasher movie right from the word go, but okay.
Oh, for real.
Yeah. But
and it's interesting because, like, they talk about, so, like, this is obviously to, like, distance Oscarson from his humanity, to make him more of a monster. But it feels like, I mean, Nick and Izzy are also getting separated from their humanities and becoming monsters as well. I mean, they've got these monstrous faces, and, they're not really interacting with anyone else. And there's, like, they keep talking, like, several times it comes up that they were, like, urinating in Oscarson's food.
Yeah, and basically handing it to him at that point, but he would eat it.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah, so they're really just dehumanizing him and themselves in the process.
Right. So it seems like the method is just to go super method in your acting.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
And they even say that there was a point where Izzy tried to wake Oscarson with a cattle prod, but he was wet, and it caused the shock to be stronger than it intended, and it knocked him unconscious for a while.
Right. But not only that, they had a terrifying dog apparently just stay over Oscarson, like when he was sleeping, and it just growled and barked at his face and stole and ate his piss food.
Yeah. So his life is pretty gruesome for those, they said this was like a 5-week process, right? So that's a long time to be suffering.
A month and a week, no thank you.
Yeah. And so by this time we're getting to where, like, the creature is coming upon the family in the cabin.
Right. And of course the old blind man's death was ruled as circumstantial. Apparently he was too decomposed with whatever they found.
Right.
Yeah.
And they talk so much shit about him. Like, I thought he was fine in the film, but, like, yeah, Gavin and David are like, he was terribly miscast. He was awful.
Right.
Like, it was one of the worst parts about the film, as far as they're concerned, is this blind man.
Well, it's probably because he also displayed humanity. I think that was their biggest issue.
And then they also say something about that the actors that played Felix and Agatha, that they were murdered together, and that their murders might have been the most brutal.
Right.
That they're still having nightmares about what happened to them.
Right. And by the way, this would be the fictional Sophie Martin and David Burney. Or no,
Yeah.
the real David Burney, but I believe the fictional Sophie Martin.
Yeah, I'm very curious about why some names are kept and some aren't.
Yeah, well, because the actual actress is Jacinta Martin, so I wonder why they kept the Martin and not the Jacinta, but they kept David. I don't know.
We'll have to ask him about it.
We will have to ask him about it.
So yeah, they even talk about that, like, by this point in the film, the cast and the crew were terrified of Oscarson, that like the method had driven him so far away from humanity that like a lot of people didn't want to be around him, and like Isabella had to double as Agatha in some scenes because
Sophie wasn't about it.
Sophie wouldn't get close enough to Oscarson for some of the shots they needed.
Right. Now, I may have misheard this, because I think they said the murderer kept Izzy in a chamber of horrors for 2 weeks, perfectly preserved.
Yeah, that's what I wrote too. Right. So they just keep sort of giving us hints about how everybody dies, but they don't really give us too much detail, which is probably for the best.
Yeah.
Like, we don't need to dwell on it too much. But yeah, apparently, she was not maimed like the others, that like the killer wanted to keep her permanently, but apparently something went wrong and he wasn't able to. But God knows where he learned to embalm.
Right. He was a great embalmer. So at this point, it's like, okay, is Oscarson the guy? I mean, that's a very sensible conclusion to be coming to at this point, because they're talking about how much he lacks humanity in his scenes. And so it's like, oh, interesting.
Yeah, and it's weird because, like, you know, like you said earlier, Danville was supposedly, like, into taxidermy, but we know he was one of, like, the first to die, so it couldn't have been him. Mm-hmm. But the embalming seems kind of tied to that. Right.
And then, of course, that's when we get the reading of the Bible by Felix. And the passage, I believe they say John 4:121.
Yeah, and David says something about that, like, so, you know, he wrote the play and or the film, and that the verse is not exactly accurate to what's in the Bible, but that he intentionally misquoted it because his mother used to always quote this passage, and she would always misquote it in the same specific way. Right. It gets the spirit of it, but just the wording's slightly different, and he just, you know, it's part of his childhood and his memories, and he wanted to kind of preserve that in the film. But then he was kind of frustrated because the quote, because it was slightly changed, it kept coming up in the trial, and people kept trying to say that it was somehow connected to the method.
Right, exactly. Everything's connected to the method. Damn it.
Yeah. And David's like, no one would have even known about the method if it wasn't for Vitali's airport press conference and him calling me Igor. Fuck him.
Right. You know what? I agree, David. Fuck him. No.
And so then, you know, we're to the point where, like, the creature is talking to the blind man, and, you know, Gavin's like, you know, this is one of the central scenes of pretty much every version of the film. It's so iconic. There's so much pathos there. But why did he even have to kill the bit actors?
Right. And he was even just executed a few months ago, you know, just a little while ago. And when it happened, Bernie's mom just jumped the rail whenever he was sentenced.
Yeah, and there's a part here, like, Gavin says he was at the trial, and for the verdict, he said he was sitting between Oscarson and Matthias's wife, and at first I thought he was saying, like, Oscarson.
Right.
But I think he's saying Oscarson's wife and Matthias's wife, like, two wives, but, like, because at first I was like, you know, it seemed like Oscarson was in the courtroom, and that is kind of confusing as we go.
Right.
But when the verdict was read, there was chaos in the courtroom, and then David says not only was he there for the trial, he went to the execution.
Right, and he was the other guy was strapped down to the gurney, and, well, David was more repulsed because he was a member of the audience than he was actually there watching someone he presumably knew and was friends with die.
Yeah.
You know, he's like, I'm a member of the audience, oh God!
Yeah, and so again, that kind of goes into their, like, disdain for the audience. But, I think they're definitely trying to tell us something about, like, that, you know, people do treat tragedy as something that we watch like an audience, whether it's, you know, slowing down at a car crash or watching horror movies. You know, there is something that causes people to want to watch terrible things. And yeah, he definitely has disdain for that, even though he's, you know, responsible for making this horror film. So it's kind of an interesting, it kind of reminded me of like that Friday the 13th Part 6, where he's like, you know, what kind of sick people want to
watch something like this. Exactly. Calling out the audience. Ah, damn it. Well, you know, even then though, David's still curious as to why he spared David and Gavin all this time and didn't try to kill them.
Yeah, I mean, like, as we've been hearing, like, so even like little bit players in the film have been killed, but yeah, Gavin and David have been spared all this time, and he doesn't really understand why.
Mm-hmm. And apparently, whenever the person died, they said, "It's all pretty ironic, isn't it, David?" and looked directly at him, even though there was that mirror in the way.
Yeah, so he knew he would be there. Mm-hmm. And David he says, like, when he left the prison, that there were a bunch of Frank heads outside in the parking lot. They were like basically tailgating this execution.
Right.
So again, sort of like this implication that like these people are messed up and like they're wanting to be an audience to tragedy.
Right.
And they're like selling T-shirts. And suddenly Gavin's like, so there were like a lot of people? They were like really curious, and how much were they selling the T-shirts for? So, you know, obviously Gavin is still like, he's sort of encouraging this sort of audience participation.
Right. Well, not only that, but that's literally when I believe Clerval says to Victor, "You forgot your case." That was what was printed on the T-shirts.
Yeah.
Which I love this fictional world.
Yeah,
where this is like a popular movie now.
Yeah, and so yeah, they were selling these like bootleg "You Forgot Your Case" T-shirts for $50 a piece at the execution.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, and Gavin's like, you know, we didn't even know what was in the case until years later.
Right, but it was terrible, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then we get our first mention of Bergwall, the producer, who arrives apparently on site at the worst possible time. So this is when they're about to do the monster confronting Victor about the bride scene. They make a big point about this.
Yeah, so they're like, this is like when they're in the Orkneys, and there's some scenes with like Victor just going on walks, and we even kind of pointed out when we talked about this last week that like there's some scenes here that just feel disconnected from everything else, and they're not really related to anything in the novel. Mm-hmm. And so they kind of explain that away, that like they had to keep shooting because the producer was there, and no one could find Oscarson.
Yeah, he was gone. So, he just ran off.
So they were just like making shit up to just kind of like keep the cast and crew busy.
Right. Well, luckily Danville was going to keep Bergwall busy on his yacht with his yacht parties.
Yeah, so then the producer's coming in like the next day, and so continuing with the thing where like they're all doing a lot of drugs and drinking a lot at night and then coming in hungover the next day. Mm-hmm. But the producer still kept coming, like even though he didn't have to be there, he just kept showing up.
Yeah, and it got so desperate that they were going to be like, "All right, Nicholas, you get to be the monster and Clerval, and you get to play both parts now."
Yeah, but then at the last minute, Izzy managed to find Oscarson, and he was drunk and disheveled. He'd like grown a beard, and they were like, it kind of completely ruined all of our method work, so we had to do a crash course in the immersion set to get him back into the right headspace.
Right, which, interesting. Okay, all right, that's something.
So they like enlist Nick to, they've got like overnight, he's got to remind him that he's the monster, and they don't know what Nick did, but it was an overnight miracle.
Right, Nick took him out in the woods, and the pair came back as a monster.
Yeah, and then the confrontation scene between Victor and the monster is just brilliant. Oscarson's best work. So whatever Nick did that night fixed everything.
Mm-hmm. He made a new monster out of him.
Yeah. And so then we're to like the scene with Henry climbing the mountain, and then we get the reveal. Gavin says, "Seeing him here, it's still so hard for me to believe that my friend Nick was secretly a serial killer."
Right, which, okay, that's interesting, because now this is where he's like hopping over the rocks and everything like that and getting ready to climb the mountain. Mm-hmm. Right.
And yeah, and Gavin's like, you know, I was the director. Like, I kind of blame myself. I got all these people together. I set this whole thing in motion. all these bit players that I hired, like I basically sealed their fate by hiring them into this cursed production, basically.
Right, and not only that, but he hasn't just been researching Frankenstein movies. He's been researching serial killers as well to see why Nick became this way.
And he can't figure it out. Like, what did he miss? Like, maybe I'm the monster. Maybe I did this somehow or caused this somehow.
That's right.
And I really wish that Oscarson had actually thrown Nick off of a cliff in this scene. That would have saved everybody a lot of pain and trouble.
Right. Well, it turns out what actually happened was Oscarson was institutionalized at the end of the filming. And that made it really hard for Nick to get to him. But Nick did eventually get to him.
Yeah. So they thought, or like it seemed like Oscarson should have been the first victim, but it seems like he was the last victim from the way that. So like he managed to break into the institution, and the orderlies found him in Oscarson's room, and Nick had cut out his eyes and partially skinned him.
And his tongue.
Yeah. So it seems like, I'm guessing that the implication there is that the orderlies then stopped Nick, and that's when he was arrested and eventually, put on trial for all these murders.
Right, exactly.
And so at that point, we're to Victor arriving home back to Geneva to see Elizabeth.
Not only Victor arriving home, but Vitaly arriving to the studio.
Yes. Yeah, so like they're Gavin and David are like, I can't believe we weren't able to save Isabella. And then Vitaly comes in, and the atmosphere completely changes when he arrives.
Yeah, Gavin kind of starts kowtowing to Vitaly, and David just gets unreasonably upset.
Yeah, Gavin's like, "How you doing, brother? Good to see you. It's been so long." He keeps calling him brother. He offers him like
a malt,
I think some kind of single malt scotch or something.
Right. Is this your favorite, right? This is your favorite, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. He's like sucking up so hard, and then like Vitaly and David are just like at each other's throats. Like, and, like Vitaly's like, "Can I smoke in here?" And David's like, "I'd rather you didn't." And then you instantly just hear a lighter sound.
Right. And he says, and he doesn't call David David. He calls David Igor. He says, "Igor, would you mind passing me the ashtray?" And of course, David's like, "That's my hat."
Yeah. So these guys hate each other. And the engineer cuts in again and is like, "Guys, we got 10 minutes, so you got to wrap things up pretty quick."
Right. And of course, Leon thought about it. He had gone past a screening that Gavin had been doing like a week or so ago, but he kind of went around it a couple times and didn't really think about going in much past passing the place a couple times, because in his eyes, this was like, oh, you're doing Rocky Horror to tragedy, effectively.
Yeah, and he's like, "Boy, you're quite the promoter. I wonder how much your dignity costs."
Right, and that's the one time that him and David agree.
Right, because David's like, "I think it's just the price of a T-shirt or a suitcase-shaped lunchbox."
Right, exactly. But apparently, Vitaly and David were good friends. As a matter of fact, on the set, they gotten really, really drunk one night and basically shut down the bar themselves. And it was just the two of them there. Then in comes Nicholas. And of course, nobody knew he was a serial killer then.
But Vitaly thinks that David might have. Like he says, when did you know he was a serial killer? When did you know that night when we were together? Or did you know the next day when we were shooting the wedding scene? Mm-hmm. And Vitaly's like, I know all about the method. Like,
Izzy told me everything.
We've gotten most of these details at this point, but he's like, I know that you starved Oscarson. I know you buried him alive. I know you pissed on him. But the buried him alive's a new one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a couple. Apparently they did it multiple times.
Yeah, and so apparently that night when Nick showed up at the bar, he was apparently just like a wreck. He begged David to let him stop. Mm-hmm. He didn't want to go forward with the method anymore, with the immersion.
But David's not having that shit. He's like, no, you're a hack. You're a terrible actor. Oscarson could run rings around you.
Yeah, this is all you're good for, so you might as well do it right. Mm-hmm. Leon at that point is like, so the method was about destroying a man's pride, not just Oscarson's, but Nick's as well. Like, you crushed both of them by, with your method.
Right, exactly. And, they tasked Nick with getting Oscarson to the point of being a monster. What they weren't expecting is they were also going to get Nick to the point of being a monster.
Yeah, and David even says something like that Nick wasn't really a member of the troupe. He was just part of the audience.
Right.
So again, this sort of like distance, this hatred for the audience. But Gavin is like, I don't understand what all this is coming. The method is just an acting technique. It's not this like boogeyman to tie all these murders to. It's just a trick to get actors to perform better on camera.
Oh, well, Leon's not having that because he's like, nah, going back to that dog, apparently Nicholas beat the crap and almost killed that dog. And that's why he didn't like people. That's why it was so mean to Oscarson.
And I think when Nick did that, he realized that there was a darkness inside him that he needed to get away from, that he needed to shut this part of him down. And he begged David to not make him go forward because he didn't know what would happen if he opened the door to that darkness.
Right. Well, not only did David open the door, David also gave him permission to go into the darkness and basically forced him into the darkness.
Yeah. And so here we kind of like get really the crux of what happened. So Nick went out after talking to David that night before the wedding scene. He found Danville. He possibly seduced him to like get him comfortable and then stabbed him 47 times, cut off his head, and put it in a suitcase.
Oh, that's where the suitcase comes from. All right.
So he took that suitcase to the immersion set. And Oscar, this is obviously the middle of the night, when they were drinking. So he found Oscarson, he woke him up, he showed Oscarson the decapitated head, threw it in the coffin that Oscarson was sleeping in, and then buried him with the head.
Right. Ugh, gosh, that's rough, man.
Yeah, and so apparently, Oscarson is, obviously this is what's turned him into a monster for the scene, is being buried alive with a decapitated head of one of your, peers, basically. But then what broke Nick is that he did all this and then he sat on this mound of dirt and listened to Oscarson scream all night long.
Right. At this point, Leon postulates that David knew about this all along. He was like, he showed you the head first.
Yeah, and David keeps denying it, and he's like, I didn't know about the head until months later when I visit him in the institution. And then Leon's like, so how many people died after you heard about that?
Right.
And David kind of like backtracks and he's like, no, I mean, he didn't tell me about the head. He told me about the like he's having trouble getting his story straight at this point. And
right.
I think that's kind of Leon's intention, is like, asking him questions and kind of moving around and stuff. And he's like, I knew Danville was dead, but I didn't know he was murdered.
Not until because we were editing at the time, and Gavin kind of backs him up at that point. He's like, yeah.
And then, he's like, Oscar was crazy. And then Gavin, he's like, wait. He starts kind of working out the timeline, and he's like, so if you knew that Nicholas killed Danville, then, like, you could have saved everybody else. Like,
exactly.
Danville would have died, but, like, you knew before, I mean, you definitely knew before Oscarson died, and you knew way before most of these people had died. And then like David just starts kind of like losing it, and he's like, I'm not taking the blame for this. I'm sane. I didn't do anything to anybody.
Right.
I'm not merchandising this like you, Gavin. Like, you're the bad guy, not me.
Right. And at this point, Vitaly is like, all right, I'm done with this. You're a fucking monster. I'm gonna call the cops.
Yeah. And David's like, just imagine how would it feel,
what kind of hell
to know,
would a person
to live with that, to know and live with the guilt, and every time the next one of your friends dies, you have to live with the fact that you could have stopped it.
Right.
Just imagine what it would feel like to be that. Still kind of like using it as a hypothetical, not really willing to fully admit that is the reality of the situation.
Right. And then, of course, he recites 1 John 121, and, well, that's when he starts losing it.
Yeah, like the movie, the last scene of the movie is David crying, reciting the Bible verse, and we're hearing the engineer bang on the door the whole time, like, it's time's up, you need to get out of here. So yeah, it's a really grim ending.
Right. But also it's very fitting because Nicholas is the monster that David created. And I think that's very poetic. So good on you for coming up with this story, because it's very Frankenstein, and I love it.
Yeah, it like, it explains the Igor thing where, like, theoretically, like, Gavin is the mad scientist, he's the director, he's running everything, but the reality is I mean, if you look at like the Universal movie, the creature doesn't really become the monster until Igor torments him.
Right.
Like he torches him with the fire, and then that's what causes the monster to sort of snap and start killing.
Exactly.
So like, Gavin may have set the wheels in motion as the director. He may have orchestrated getting all those people together, and he may have been responsible for the idea of the method, but really David was the one who
made the monster.
He's the one who made the monster into a monster.
All right. So Jay Kirk and Tim Kirk, good job. Good job, guys. That's a hell of a story.
Yeah, it's a fantastic story. Yeah, so I'm guessing Jay is Tim's brother or something, but yeah, they wrote it together, and it's a hell of a story. It's a really, really good story, and it's also just such a unique piece of media that you're never going to see anything quite like this.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's basically an audio play, which over an actual movie. So it's kind of like a very dark Mystery Science Theater 3000.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, I would definitely, track it down if you can. If you didn't kickstart it way back in 2015,
yeah,
I feel bad for you.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's very difficult to track down because I'm pretty sure that they just made a batch for Kickstarter backers and then maybe have some spares left over, but I don't think this ever went into any kind of whether physical store or web store of any kind. I'm pretty sure it was just that initial Kickstarter and that's it.
But I believe this is a special offer for the Frankencast listeners. I believe you can that's a lie. I'm sorry, I'm lying. But I believe you can contact Tim Kirk, and he might have something for you. He might be able to sell you something.
Yeah. Tim, the number 2 Kirk at yahoo.com. Definitely, I highly recommend it. I've had this for years since I backed it, and it's definitely like a prized possession that I know how hard it is to track down. So yeah, I was really excited when I just reached out to him and he was like, yeah, I've got a few if people want them. So I highly recommend checking it out if you're into the physical media stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of want to see if I can get one of those, what is it? Here's your bag shirts.
Yeah. I seem to remember that maybe if you backed the Kickstarter at like a much higher level, they may have made some of those shirts, but I had the money to get the DVD, and I was happy with that, but I couldn't afford the higher level.
Hell yeah.
But I feel like I'm pretty sure that there was something like that.
Well, maybe we can find out. Maybe we can convince them to make a couple for us. Who knows?
Yeah.
We can inspire the true fandom that is Terror Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Maybe. Where can they find us, Anthony?
So you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at the Frankencast. You can find us on YouTube. You can email us at thefrankencast@gmail.com, and you can find us over on Patreon at patreon.com/thefrankencast.
Yep.
Where we've been doing our month of Munsters. We kind of finished or wrapped that up here in the main feed. We're still getting into Munsters content over on the Patreon. So if you're missing out on that, there's a lot of weird Munsters related stuff over there.
Absolutely.
To lead you up into the Rob Zombie movie.
Yeah, and let's say hey to our patrons.
Yeah, thank you all so much. We really appreciate the support. And everybody else, we appreciate your support in whatever way you can give it, whether it's monetary or rates or reviews, whatever you got. We're happy to have that interaction.
Hey, what's going on next week, Anthony? What we got going on there?
So, if you notice the episode number of this episode, we're at 52, which means
that's 1 year.
It's for a full year.
What?
Yeah, it's wild. So next week will be like the actual year anniversary. So we're gonna do a special anniversary episode. We're gonna take it back as far back as you can get in terms of movie coverage. We're gonna talk about the Thomas Edison produced short film, the oldest existing version of Frankenstein. It's a short film. We'll probably end up doing some kind of year-end recap stuff as well. Just kind of like having a little anniversary party that we'll kind of invite you all to, I guess.
Yeah. Happy anniversary, everybody.
Yeah, so that should be fun.
Yeah.
And in between that, if all the things go according to plan, we're going to be talking to Tim Kirk. So we'll have a bonus episode here in the main feed at some point where we'll get to find out a little bit more about the making of this, because it's such a fascinating thing. Like, it's such a strange and unique idea that we're excited to kind of try to pick his brain and see how this all came about.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, we've got to tear into that brain and figure out the inner workings.
Definitely an Abby normal, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. That Abby normal brain.
Yeah, we're right there with him though, so that's fine.
All right, folks, and as always, to be continued.
Looks like you survived another episode. The Frankencast is a production of FCR Media. It's hosted by Anthony Bowman and Eric Velasquez. Follow us on Twitter at The Frankencast, or send us a letter at thefrankencast@gmail.com. Our cover art is by Amanda Keller. You can find her at Keller Illustrations on Instagram. Our theme music is by Vivek Abhishek. Thanks for listening.